Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, Chapter 28. The chief culprit in the destruction of all the very saintly labors of Ashiata Shiemash. You remember that I have already told you that the basis of the initiative for the arising there of the factors which became the causes of the final destruction of the still surviving remains of the beneficent results of the conscious labors of the very saintly Ashiata Shiemash for the subsequent generations of your favorites, did not issue from the learned beings who were then assembled from almost the whole of the surface of the planet in the city of Babylon, but that these latter, as it had long before become proper to most of the terrestrial learned beings of new formation, were only like contagious bacilli, the unconscious disseminators of every kind of then existing evil for their own and for subsequent generations. The basis for all the further great and small maleficent activities and unconscious maleficent manifestations of the learned beings of that time concerning the destruction of even the last remnants of the results, beneficent for the three-brained beings there, obtained from the very saintly conscious labors of the essence-loving Ashiata Shiemash, were, as my later detailed researches concerning these further very saintly activities made clear to me, the invention of a learned being, well known there in his time, also belonging to the number of learned beings of new formation and named Lenthro Hamsanin. As a result of his inner what is called double gravity-centered existence, the highest being part of the presence of this terrestrial three-brained being was coated and perfected up to the required gradation of objective reason. And later, this highest being part became, as I've once already told you, one of those 313 highest being bodies who are called eternal Hasnamas individuals, and who have the place of their further existence in the universe on a small planet existing under the name of eternal retribution. Now, strictly speaking, about this terrestrial three-brained being Lenthro Hamsanin, I would have to fulfill my promise and to explain to you in detail about the expression Hasnamas, but I prefer to do so a little later in the proper place of the sequence in this tale. The mentioned maleficent invention, or as they themselves, that is, the contemporary terrestrial learned beings, name such an invention of a learned being there of new formation, a composition, or even a creation, was actualized, as I've already told you, 2 or more centuries before the time when, during my 5th sojourn there, I first reached the city of Babylon, where, partly by coercion and partly voluntarily, learned beings had been assembled from the surface of almost the whole of the planet. The maleficent composition of that learned being of former centuries reached the learned beings of the said Babylonian epoch by means of what is called a Kashia Reitlir, on which this invention was engrossed by the said learned Lenthro Hamsanin himself. I find it very necessary to inform you a little more in detail about the history of the arising of this Lenthro Hamsanin, and also how, owing to which accidental circumstances of his environment, he later became there a great learned being and authority for his contemporary beings of almost the whole surface of your planet. In addition to this history itself being very characteristic, it can also serve as a good elucidatory example of that practice which has long ago become firmly established in the process of the existence of these three-brained beings who have taken your fancy, the result of which is that several of them at first become so to say, authorities for other learned beings of new formation, and thereby later for all the unfortunate ordinary beings there. The details concerning the conditions of the arising and subsequent formation of this Lentro Hamsanin into a responsible being chanced to become clear to me, by the way, during my investigations of which aspects of the strange psyche of your favorites were the basis for the gradual change, and ultimately also for the total destruction of all those beneficent special forms and customs in the process of their being existence, which had been introduced and firmly fixed in this process by the ideally foreseeing reason of our now omnicosmic, most very saintly Ashiata Shiemash, during the period of his self-preparation, to be that which he now is for the whole of the universe. It was then that I learned that this Lentro Hamsanin arose, or, as it is said there, was born on the continent Asia, in the capital of Nievia, the town Kronbuchon. The conception of his arising resulted from the blending of two heterogeneous Exioiharis formed in two already elderly three-brained Keschapmartnian beings there. His producers, or as it is said there, his parents, having chosen as the place of their permanent existence the capital of Nievia, moved there 3 terrestrial years before the arising of that later universal Hasnamas. For his elderly and very rich parents, he was what is called a firstborn. For although the blending of their Exioiharis had been many times actualized between them before him, yet, as I found out, they, being deeply engaged in the business of acquiring riches, and not wishing to have any hindrance for this, had recourse at each actualizing of this sacred blending to what is called tusi, or as your contemporary favorites express themselves, abortion. Towards the end of his activities in acquiring riches, the source of the active principle of his origin, or as it is said there, his father, had several of his own what are called caravans, and he also owned special caravanserais for the exchange of goods in various cities of this same Nievia. And the source of the passive principle of his origin, that is, his mother, was at first of the profession of what is called Tusiji. But later, on a small mountain, she organized what is called a holy place, and published, broadcast among other beings, information concerning its supposed special significance, namely that beings of the female sex without children would, on visiting this place, acquire the possibility of having them. When this couple, in what is called the decline of their years, had already become very rich, they moved to the capital city Kronbuchon in order to exist there, but only for their own pleasure. But soon they felt that without a real result, or as they say there, in childlessness, there cannot be full pleasure, and from that time on, without sparing what is called money, they took every kind of measure to obtain such a result. With this end in view, they visited various holy places existing there for that purpose, of course with the exception of their own holy mountain, and resorted to every kind of what are called medical means which purported to assist the blending of heterogeneous Exioiharis. And when eventually by chance such a blending was actualized, then there indeed arose after a certain time just that long-awaited result of theirs, later called Lentro Hamsanin. From the very first day of his arising, the parents were, as it is said, completely wrapped up in what they described as their God-sent result, or son, and they spent